5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, time's expired. Pass in your papers. I need all the papers for the next 10 seconds. Let's go. Go, 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 go. We don't want anybody coming in late.
I knew I wrote that down.
This is special for you guys. This will help you give you the edge on that last test. And by the way, I always look for people who come to class regularly for extra attendance and stuff. If you're on the bubble for a grade, all that kind of stuff. Did I get everybody's? Just in the nick of time. All right, good job. All right, what are they?
Unemployment at natural rate.
Unemployment.
Inflation.
Unemployment. Inflation.
Our GDP.
And real GDP. Those are the biggies. As long as you've got 1 out of the 3, you're going to get extra credit. You have to at least get 1 out of the 3 to get your extra credit today. Now, really, when I talk about the biggies, I'd like to have kind of the thoughts of what we want them to be also. So with unemployment, what do we want unemployment to be? What would be our goal? The natural rate. So we got the natural rate of unemployment, which we'll be calling U subscript N, the natural rate of unemployment. So not zero unemployment, but a healthy economy still has some unemployment. Inflation, low and stable. Low and stable inflation. And then real GDP? Going up, increasing some economic growth. So those are our 3 policy goals. And so what we're starting on today is what we call the goods market. And so the goods market is actually going to tackle all 3 of these. So we're going to measure the price level on the vertical axis and real GDP on the horizontal. Remember, we use Y for real GDP because it's like the nation's income. What is the nation's income roughly? What's our round number that we like to think of, just so we kind of have those sorts of dollars off the top of our head? 20 million, billion, trillion, gazillion, zazillion, quadrillion, trillion, right? So $20 trillion. And so the first thing I like to start off with is the supply curve for all the goods and services, which is kind of a weird thing to even think about, the supply curve. And so the supply curve ends up looking like this. I'm just going to kind of give it to you and then try to justify it. So long run aggregate supply, that's supposed to be a perfectly vertical line if you draw yours carefully. So when you have in math class a perfectly vertical or perfectly horizontal, what does it tell you about the relationship between the 2 variables? How are they related to each other? Positive relationship, negative relationship, unrelated? So what's the relationship between the 2 variables that you're measuring on the axes, price level and real GDP? If we have a perfectly vertical, or it could be a perfectly horizontal, by the way, but is it what? Positive? So positive relationship? So what does a positive relationship mean between 2 variables?
They both go up.
They both go up. They tend to go up together. They move together, right? So as the sun goes up, if we have a more sunshine state, the sales of suntan lotion go up, right, of sunscreen. And so in states where there's a lot of shade, like up in Seattle or something, sunscreen sales go down, right? So sunscreen sales and sunshine are 2 variables that would move together. They'd be positively related. One goes up, the other goes up. One goes down, the other goes down. They move together. It's a positive relationship. What's a negative relationship? Down and up. So one goes up, the other tends to go down. One goes down, the other one tends to go up. Right? So moving opposite of each other. And so is this a positive relationship? If this is a perfectly vertical line here with real GDP and the price level. How do we show this graphically, a positive and negative relationship?
If the price level goes up, people going to spend more, which would increase the GDP.
Okay, so that's not the question I was asking. I want to know mathematically, if there's a graph that looks like this, how are these two variables related? Let's see, Bryce, give me a number between 3 and 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Lawson, just happened to be you. Come on up. You're the one that gave us the positive, I think, right? Yeah. So, sunshine and sunscreen sales. Positive, negative, what was the relationship? Positive. You guys can help them out too. So graph that relationship. Graph me what happens here as more sunshine goes up, sales go up. Right. Okay? So there's a positive relationship. Is this a positive relationship? Is there a difference here? As this one goes up from here to here, what happens to this one? Stays the same. So how are they related with each other? Go ahead, Blessing, you can take a seat. Thanks. You're doing good. They're not related, right? So they're independent of each other. They're unrelated. It doesn't matter what this one is. This one's always right here. Let's call it Y1. So at this level of real GDP, let's just say it's 20 trillion. So $20 trillion worth of real GDP, it doesn't matter if the price level is 100 or 107 or 110. That's what that means. They're independent of each other. They're independent of each other. Okay, and of course, this is a positive relationship. As long as I got this picture up here, is this a positive relationship?
Yes.
Yes. Is this a positive relationship? Yes, this one is too. So now, what's the difference? I'm glad we're having this discussion. This is in your appendix chapter, by the way, that kind of reviews all this. So what's the difference between A, B, and C? It is true they are all positive relations. What's the difference?
Slope.
The slopes are different, and the slopes are changing on a curve. So we say that each one of these functions, or relationships between two variables, a function is kind of a fancy mathematical way of saying it, they are increasing with each other, right? That's the positive part. As this increases, this increases. So this is an A, B, and C are all increasing functions. C we've seen before, back in the labor chapter. What thing looked like that? It was on your test. Law of diminishing returns. So it was the production function, right? You saw that on your test. This one is increasing at a decreasing rate. This one is increasing at an increasing rate. And what's this one doing?
Increasing at a fixed rate.
Increasing at a fixed rate. So if I do rise over run, the slope is constant here, right? You remember along the line? I do a little rise over run here, a little rise over run here. A line has a constant slope. Whereas a curve, what do we do for a curve? How do we find the slope of a curve? Jacob, what's this mean? Naughty, naughty? Jacob was doing this. I like that.
Yeah.
But it's not naughty, naughty, right?
You have another line that connects a point on the curve line.
What do we call that? A couple of you are a little more mathematically inclined, I think, from classes that you have. The tangent line, yes. So to find the slope of a curve, you pick a point, which of course would be related to this point and this point for sunscreen and sales, and then you take the tangent line at that point. That line curve is going to kiss a curve at one point and one point only. Like it's not good enough, it's not good enough, it's not there, it's not there, it's not there, it's not there, it's not there. Mwah! It's Valentine's Day. Big kiss noise, right? It's just kissing the curve at one point and one point only. At that point, the slope of this line is the slope of the curve at that point. But what if I do it down here? Right there. This one is steeper, right? So the slope changes as we go. It's getting flatter as we go. So it's increasing at a decreasing rate. Okay. Didn't really think I was going to get sidetracked that far on that, but that kind of helps for this thinking, I hope. So what we're defining is the long run relationship between all the crap we can make in a given year and the prices of that crap. This, remember, when we use the real word, why do we use the real word? What's it taking into account? Inflation has been taken into account. So when I see $20 trillion, I shouldn't really be thinking dollars. What should I be thinking? What was the calculation? So real GDP, what was one of the earlier formulas we had? How did we calculate real? We could do maybe nominal GDP would be easier to start off with. So nominal GDP was equal to what? Not the cigarettes. I'm not looking for cigarettes at this point. Some of the, excellent, Kaylin, that's worth an extra credit point. Some of the prices, I'm feeling generous today, so you guys keep talking. Maybe I'll just keep giving out points. Help you overcome those terrible test scores or something. Okay. No, did I say that? No. Oh, fine. All of you that are here, I'm sure, are the people that regularly come and get that. All right, so let's see. All right, so the sum of all of the prices times the quantities. So it was the sum of the price of chicken wings times the quantity of chicken wings, plus the price of pizza times the quantity of pizza, plus the price of beer times the quantity of beer. It was the sum for all N goods in the economy, all the stuff on the shelves at Walmart, plus everything else in the nation, the dollar value of all final goods and services produced within the nation's boundaries over the course of a year, right? That's the 20-ish trillion stuff. Now, when we did the base year thing, we did real GDP and used the base year, which filtered out that price effect. So what that means is that real GDP is really focusing in on the Q. So when we see 20 trillion here, we're not really thinking dollars anymore, but we're thinking the quantity of pizza we ate, the quantity of beer we drank, the quantity of chicken wings we ate, the quantity of lawyer service hours we had, the quantity of dental work done on my teeth, right? It's the quantities of stuff that ultimately kind of bring us material happiness anyway, unless they're bads instead of goods, which that's kind of a weird case. So this, start thinking that that's the quantity of stuff. So this says literally that the quantity of crap we have is independent of the prices. So what are the things that constrain the quantity of crap we can have in a given year? What are the really underlying things that constrain us from having as much beer and chicken wings as we want? Flip side of saying that is, how can I get more chicken wings, beer, dental services, and lawyer services? I don't know if I want those last two, but how can we get more? Like, how can the economy start moving that direction? For a given population, that means there'd be more material things for the population to have.
Right.
Trade. So trade, opening up the doors for trade kind of opened up other opportunities. Okay? Innovation. Boom. That's the biggie. One of the biggies. So technology, right? So we have changes in technology, some innovation that allows us to do use our scarce resources of labor more efficiently. Like one person can do what it took 5 people to do before because of an innovation. That's huge, a big change in productivity. Okay? What else can help this thing move to the right? What do we need more of? We don't need lower prices, that's what this is saying. It's actually independent of prices. Prices are a manifestation of human action. Prices are the things that emerge from human behavior. So what are the true underlying things? Innovation is one of them. What else? New products. Where do new products come from? Because we have all the products here. The innovation could have been partly due to a product. What was the production possibilities frontier? Remember that sucker? That was our first model back from chapter 2. And then we continued on in the international chapter with the production possibilities frontier. We had Tom and Jen on the island. And so we had the production possibilities frontier. I'm going to make it a curvy one this time. That's the way the real one would look. So we had, you know, maybe some pizza and beer. Remember that thing way back when? Real important model for economics. Shows a lot of things. A lot of the basic principles of economics are in that. What did that show? Opportunity costs. It did reflect opportunity costs. So the trade-offs of if I want more beer, I need more pizza, right? What was it to be along the edge of it?
How much of each you can produce.
How much of each you can produce? What about being inside? It's not efficient. So we had this notion of efficiency. You can be inside, but you're not utilizing what? All your resources and all your technology. Now, once you get to the edge, you are being efficient. You are utilizing all your resources and technology. And therefore, if you want to move from point B to point A, you face a trade-off. You have to give up some beer to get some more pizza. That was the notion of opportunity cost. So opportunity cost came out of that, one of the top principles of economics. So now, how do we get back to kind of my question, how do we get more pizza and beer? These are quantities, remember. On this graph, we didn't have dollars. This was the quantity of beer and the quantity of pizza. How does the economy get more? Bryce already said technology was one of them. We figure out how to make beer better. So a new innovation comes in with beer and allows us to, like, if we devoted all of society's resources to beer production, we could have 100, but now we could have 130 beers with this new technology. The beer technology had nothing to do with pizza, but my new production possibilities frontier kind of had a biased shift outward. So did the beer technology actually get me potentially more pizza? Yeah, that was the exciting thing, I think, about this graph. Exciting as far as econ goes for me. I mean, it gives me goosebumps. I hope it does you eventually. When you start thinking about this, is that any old technology could lead us now to being at points A, B, C, D, E, and F. All of those points are at higher levels of pizza and beer than I was at before. Even though the beer technology had nothing to do with pizza technology, right? That's cool. So how else can it shift out besides technology? What was the other shifters for the production possibilities frontier?
More people.
More people, so more labor, right? So more labor could go out. If we have more people, then that would allow maybe both pizza and beer to shift out. Maybe we can move out to something like this. And it shifts out for both pizza and beer, more labor. So an increase in labor. What else?
Increase in tech and knowledge.
In what knowledge? In knowledge?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, we could look at human capital. is our kind of fancy econ word. Human capital, so this would be knowledge and skills in the labor. So this one is kind of more people, not necessarily more educated people. This could be more knowledge in the people we got. Those are two different things, right? Okay. What else? I was hoping the word capital with human capital might ring a bell. What else could we have more of that would help us make more beer and pizza?
Savings and investment.
Savings and investment, which would be used to buy capital. Okay? If we have more machines, more resources, so if there's an increase in capital, this is physical capital now again. Physical buildings, machines, tools, computers, stuff that helps make other stuff. So it's a resource. So we got labor, human capital, physical capital. If we have more natural resources, you know, if there's an increase in sunshine this year, or maybe it's rainfall or whatever, increase in natural resources, we find oil underneath North Dakota. Imagine that happening. That did happen. So shale oil with a new technology that allowed horizontal drilling and stuff like that and fracking. That was allowed to extract the largest oil reserve in the United States was just discovered in the last 10 to 20 years. The largest amount of oil is up in North Dakota. Didn't even know it was there, right? So now all of a sudden we have more natural resources. That would allow us to have more pizza and more beer. So what causes economic growth is not the prices of these things, but the underlying forces of supply and demand within each one and how they're related to each other. Because as we have an innovation in beer, it doesn't just get us more beer, but can also get us more pizza, because now I have less people or less other resources that are needed towards beer production, which now can be freed up to make some pizza, right? So there's this shifting of resources to a higher and better use. That's pretty awesome. Okay, so questions on that? The reason I wanted to hammer out a little bit of this with what we learned in chapter 2 is that's what moves this. Same thing. That's what's going to shift this thing to the right. If we have more human capital, more people, more physical capital, more natural resources, more technology, that's economic growth in the long run. So the economy will continue to kind of march this way as we have an accumulation of resources. Okay, so questions on that? Let's write some of that out so you have a good set of notes here. So the long run aggregate supply curve. So long run aggregate. Aggregate's just a fancy word of adding everything up, right? So aggregate supply curve. The LAS. The long run aggregate supply curve shows the long run potential output, parentheses, real GDP, if we think about the quantity now, the quantity of output, shows the long run potential. In fact, I'm going to add that in here, quantity of output, so that we really emphasize that. Because it's easy to get lost in the dollars, because we usually think, oh, real GDP is $20 trillion. Well, I really want you thinking quantity. So it shows the long run potential output, real GDP, when there is full employment of resources. When there is full employment of resources. And then let's put the last little bullet here. It is independent of the price level. It is independent of the price level. Now, I underlined full employment. Does anybody remember what that was connected to? The full employment rate back from chapter 23, I guess it would have been, maybe 24. Full employment.
That's just when there's no cyclical unemployment.
Say that again?
Just like when there's no the cyclical unemployment.
Yeah, okay, so good. So we had cyclical unemployment, and so there was structural and frictional unemployment. So it was with the kind of employment thing. So what was the connection between the full employment rate and unemployment? I want to come back to Kaylin. Thanks. You're the one who said it. And I'm not trying to pick on you, but I think you already know the answer, but I need to milk it out. So unemployment rate, when we talk about goals for the economy, what did we want? What did we want with the unemployment? The natural rate. Was that you or was that somebody else that said natural rate? Was that you? Okay, sorry, Bryce, to take away your scene there. All right, so the natural rate of unemployment is the unemployment rate that exists when the economy is at full employment, right? So the economy has the resources fully employed, which means that we have just the natural rate of unemployment. So the potential for the economy, and I'm going to modify, if you guys put a 1 here like I did, I'm going to make a little modification and put pot. I have not shifted the conversation to marijuana, although I have been known to do that once in a while. It's usually a micro class. For those of you who haven't had micro, you got that to look forward to. We'll talk about pot. Well, you got one more to look forward to. That's just a really minor, small bonus. But so we have the pot potential is what the pot stands for. The potential level of real GDP. Potential level of real GDP. All right, so let's write that down. Let's just go ahead and add that as another note here. So Y pot equals potential real GDP, the potential for the economy. So underneath that, unemployment equals the natural rate, which I already defined earlier, so you can write it out if you didn't earlier. U subscript N, the natural rate. So unemployment's at the natural rate when we're at this full employment rate. So the economy, relating back to the PDF, remember we didn't have any unused resources. We were using everything efficiently, so we're also kind of on the edge of the production possibilities frontier, is another way to describe that. So let's put another little bullet since I'm getting bullet happy here. So economy is on the edge of the production possibilities frontier. We're operating efficiently. Okay, so long run aggregate supply shifters. What makes that thing move? We pretty much already listed them. Number one, a change in resources. So an increase in labor leads to an increase in the LAS, which is, as usual, the up arrow means a shift to the right. So now, instead of shifting out like we did with the production possibilities frontier, we've got this kind of normalized quantity of stuff that's going to move to the right if we've got some more labor. If we've got some more capital, we have a shift to the right. If we have some more human capital, we shift to the right. Number 2, technology. An increase in technology leads to an increase in the long-run aggregate supply curve. Shift to the right. You know, I never used to add this, but since Lawson, you brought it up, and since we're going to be talking about this in the next section, the international trade stuff. So let's go ahead and put that down. I'm not sure, the textbook has it in different ways that we had before. So I'm just going to put in here a reduction of trade barriers. So, which would be kind of an increase in international trade. But how are we getting an increase in international trade? Because we have a fixed amount of laws on the books. If those laws include 25% tariffs, then that might be our potential, given the fact that we have 25% tariffs. So if we reduce permanently the tariffs from 25 to 0, then that would cause a shift to the right. We'd end up having more production going on, because what we're essentially doing, by the way, when we do that is we're better utilizing global resources. It's like Americans are getting to take advantage of another country's resources. So it's like we increased our resource base in a sense when we engage in international trade. So number 3, let's put a reduction in trade barriers. Leads to an increase in long-run aggregate supply. So that would be like tariffs, for example. So a decrease in tariffs leads to an increase in long-run aggregate supply. The country changes their tariff policy. Let's put on there kind of the key insight to that is essentially USA gets to better utilize global resources. So in that respect, that number 3 is kind of similar to number 1, which was the biggie here, a change in resources. By changing our tariffs, we might have been able to use the resources that we couldn't use before or use as much of. So this makes this kind of like number 1, change in resources. Yeah, but you're going to hurt American jobs. Gosh, here we go again. Okay, so hopefully we'll give you guys a little ammunition to look at some of that stuff. All right, questions on that? so that's the long run aggregate supply curve showing the potential for the economy. The short run, though, in a shorter period of time, we'd expect there to be some sort of trade-off. So let's go ahead and draw the short run curve, and let's just, I don't know if you guys put this 100 here or not, but you can put it in. There's a short run aggregate supply curve that is upward sloping, a positive relationship between the two. All right, so short run aggregate supply, the SAS curve, shows a possible positive relationship between the price level and real GDP. Okay, so that seems a little bit weird. I go for short run, long run. So we got to kind of explain what's going on here. So let's do a little, you know, most supply curves are upward sloping. So if we look at, well, not all of you have had micro, but we did have our labor supply curve and stuff. So the supply of labor, let me go ahead and try to work with this labor supply curve and labor hours and the real wage. So the labor supply curve was upward sloping, meaning that if you pay somebody more money, they will come and work more. So they'll go from L1 to L2, moving from point A to B. If their wages increase from $10 to $13. So most supply curves look like this. They don't look like the way we drew the long run. And the reason they look that way for not only wage or labor, but also for, let's draw another one for pizza. So if we look at the quantity of pizza and the price of pizza, the supply curve looks like this, where the business person's saying, if I can get $10 a pizza, I'll supply 100 pizzas. If I can get $13 per pizza, I'll make more money, so I'll supply 130. Right? So all the supply curves from microeconomics class, which this one is kind of a hybrid here with the labor supply, are upward sloping. So if most goods look like that, how do we reconcile this issue? Well, when we do this supply relationship of prices go up, the prices are going up just for the price of pizza, not the price of labor. So what we're holding constant is we're saying, hey, business owner, pizza time on Ottawa Main Street. If all of a sudden you can get $3 more for pizza, how much more would you be willing to supply? And they say, well, wait a second. Does dough cost more? No. Does pepperoni cost more? No. Does cheese cost more? No. Does my labor cost more? No. So none of the resource prices are going to go up. We're simply going to say, if you can get $3 for pizza, how much more will you get? How much more would you produce? And that's the supply relationship. Well, that's exactly what we're doing here with this assumption on the short run aggregate supply curve. We are talking about all goods and services. However, it seems kind of reasonable to think that there could be differences in the price adjustments of resource prices and output prices. I think this is easiest if I give you an example here. So suppose the economy is starting to slow down, right? And there's just some early signs that we might be going into a recession. What was a recession again, defined as? What goes down for 2 quarters? Real GDP goes down for 2 quarters. So remember the ups and downs of the economy. So kind of recession, something's going on. And so what does Walmart see when things start to slow down? What happens with the product on their shelves? Does it go up or down? As people aren't buying as much, if we're going into recession, it goes up, right? So people aren't buying as much. Walmart's trying to sell products. So in response to that, on the very early stages, we don't necessarily know that there's a recession, but the economy goes through these ups and downs. We're not sure why. But when Walmart starts to have excess inventory on the shelves, what do? Mark down prices. Do they also cut people's wages at the same time they mark down prices? Kind of walk with me through the story here. So the economy maybe is doing something. Walmart doesn't know any better. Walmart just starts to see that there's excess inventory on the shelves. What do they do first? Cut their employees' pay or drop the prices of the products on the shelves? Drop the prices. They have a sale, right? So prices start to fall, and maybe they start to move a little product, but they still start to see excess inventory. So they cut the prices again. And so now they're known for low prices, but not that low, right? And so they start to call off maybe some other people. Now, if the economy tends to remain slow, they used to have 10 people at the checkout line. Do they have 10 coming now when business starts to fall off? No, right? Are they giving, when business is starting to fall off, are they giving pay raises? No, right? Eventually, if things got bad enough, might they have to ask their employees to take a pay cut? Yeah, probably not Walmart. And you might have to go a little bit from Walmart. But when we went through the recession of 2008, there was people that had to take real cuts. I was one of them here at Ottawa University. Sucked. It wasn't my real pay, but it was my retirement contributions. So Ottawa University used to pay up to 5%. I put in $1, they put in $1. Is that a good deal? Yeah. Is that real money out of their pocket, though, for compensation? Yeah, it's still real money. They actually have to contribute. So what they did is they eliminated our match. So yes, I didn't get my salary cut, but I think of it as my overall compensation package, right? And so companies started doing that, not just Ottawa University, lots of other places. And so the point with that is that when things are changing in the economy, what tends to move first? Output prices or resource prices? With my story, output prices move first, and then if they stay low, eventually resource prices lag behind them. They're going to have to take a cut. So that's where we get this picture here with the upward sloping supply curve, is that along this supply curve, we're going to allow output prices and resource prices to adjust at different rates. So when we move along a short-run aggregate supply curve, how could we possibly get a boost in the economy? Well, to move from, let's say, point A to point B, along this short-run aggregate supply curve, nominal wages were fixed at $10 an hour. Resource prices were held constant. So now we're telling the same story I did with pizza time in Ottawa, when you get a higher price, am I able to keep my wages the same? Yep. Are my dough prices going up? Nope. Are my pepperoni prices going up? Nope. So we're going to make kind of a difference here between output price adjustment and resource price adjustment. Along the short-run aggregate supply curve, resource prices are fixed. Only the output prices are going up. So the 7% bump, 100 price level to 107, a 7% increase. If the economy moved from A to B, it was a 7% increase in just the output prices, not resource prices. All right, any questions? I'm going to put this on the board, but any questions conceptually before I move forward? Yeah.
So your short run supply curve, is that still in real GDP though, if it's not for resource prices?
It's still real GDP, yes. So we're just having more product produced, more products being sold. So there's kind of something going on with inventories that I haven't talked about, but we have more product being sold. So there's these lag times between the time we produce product to the time it actually gets run through the cash register, right? And so that's kind of this process that's all kind of playing out throughout a period of time. Okay. Over a long enough period of time, that's pretty stable. And it might be a good time for me, I'll do it after this, but kind of rehash the business cycle a little bit with the ups and downs that I mentioned. Okay, anything else before I kind of write some of this out? I'll give you guys lots of stuff here to reference back to. Okay, so short-run aggregate supply, this is kind of where we left off. Short-run aggregate supply shows a possible positive relationship between the price level and real GDP. Resource prices, like the nominal wage, big W, just like what we used in the previous chapter. Resource prices along the short-run aggregate supply curve are assumed to be fixed. Along with the quantity of resources and technology. Resource prices along the short-run aggregate supply curve are assumed to be fixed, along with the quantity of resources and technology. So, the story. Let's say, let's call this justifying the assumption, the story. Input prices likely, let me put input price adjustment. Input price changes likely follow or lag behind output price changes. Input price changes likely follow or lag behind output price changes. So, example, if economy slows and Walmart has excess inventory, it will cut output prices before cutting wages. So that's our little example, kind of motivated. All right, so now, what causes short-run aggregate supply shifters? What is going to cause that thing to move? Number 1 and number 2, I guess, and number 3 now that I put 1, 2, and 3, those are easy. They are the same as the LAS shifters. So whatever moves the short run, the long run aggregate supply is also going to move the short run. And they're going to actually move together if that happens. And then the last one is the most important one. Number 4 is the change in resource prices. So the change in resource prices. So an increase in the nominal wage, the resource prices of the price Walmart has to pay to their employees, an increase in wage will lead to a decrease or increase. Let's do a little golf club analysis here. So now my wage used to be $10 an hour, but my employees are thinking they're going to go up to $13 an hour. Does that make this sucker move this way or this way for the businesses paying those wages? At higher wages, are they able to supply more or less? Less, right? So at higher wages, we're going to have a shift to the left of the short-run aggregate supply curve. So a decrease in the short-run aggregate supply, a shift to the left. Okay. Questions on that so far? We'll come kind of circle back around to that eventually too. So I think this is a good time to bring up the business cycle again. So the business cycle is the ups and downs of the economy. So we're measuring time on the horizontal axis, like in years. We've looked at some things in the previous chapters on what that looks like. And the economy, real GDP, tends to go up, and then it comes down, and then it goes up, and kind of this, who knows what it's going to look like. I'm just kind of drawing one. Just don't make it a perfect, like, you know, cycle up and down. Give it a little bit of bumps and grooves and stuff. So real GDP fluctuates over time. It doesn't stay right here at 20, but rather it kind of goes back and forth a little bit, right? It kind of wiggles around. Over time, if we kind of took a statistical average, that's what we're really calling our potential. So now this trend is our Y pot. There's our pot. Back to marijuana. You had circle back to that eventually. So over time, we tend to go back and forth around our potential. So from this graph, we're kind of going back and forth around our potential level of real GDP. All the time, if there's an upward trend, if GDP, as it has in the United States, long-term anyway, been growing at like 3% a year, over time, this thing is kind of like moving this direction, right? A little bit, like here it goes. Kind of a slow march forward. And then the idea with this short-run aggregate supply is that it's going to be potentially moving or lagging behind. So our missing puzzle piece here is the demand for this stuff. And that's going to help kind of bring the whole picture together. So our demand for goods and services, let's do orange today. Let's put it right through that point A, the aggregate demand curve. So aggregate demand is our desires to buy all this stuff. All right, aggregate demand, AV. So aggregate demand shows the quantity of goods and services demanded at various price levels. And it is downward sloping due to two reasons. Reason A, or number one here, is the wealth effect. The wealth effect. So what was wealth again? How do we measure somebody, how wealthy they are, or what their net worth is? What they own minus what they owe, right? So the value of those of you in Professor Wagner's accounting class, the value of your assets minus the value of your liabilities. So as your let's say inflation goes up, so as the price level increases, what happens to the real value of your wealth, the money that you stored away? So let's pretend we're millionaires. That's kind of a fun thing to do. So you've got $1 million saved up in stocks and bonds and other assets, right? So the value of your assets is $1 million, and you've been following my advice and Dave Ramsey's advice, and you're debt-free. So you are a millionaire. 1 million, what you own minus what you owe is equal to 1 million minus 0. You're debt-free, you're a millionaire. Now, if inflation kicks in, what happens to the real value of your wealth? It goes down, right? So if you're a millionaire, you need to be, just to kind of give you one example here, is if there was 7% inflation, what interest rate do you need to earn on your investments to just keep up with the price changes? 7%, right? That was that whole purchasing power thing with the Fisher formula. So if prices go up 7%, the value of my wealth will go down, and that that would cause me to want to do some saving. And so I would increase my savings and decrease some of my consumption or decrease my demand for purchases. So the wealth effect here is that an increase in the price level leads to a decrease in your wealth, which is the value of your assets. An increase in the price level leads to a decrease in your wealth, which leads to an increase in needing to save more and a decrease in consumption. This would be a decrease in consumption would be a movement along the aggregate demand curve to the left with an increase in the price level. So what we're trying to do here is just say, why is this thing downward sloping? One of the reasons is people are making decisions between consumption and investment. And so the wealth effect is one reason why it's downward sloping. Questions on the wealth effect? That makes sense? Thinking about purchasing power of your assets and stuff? So the next one is some substitution effects. Substitution effects. I'm just going to write that down and then I'll go right over here so we can be a little bigger. So one of the substitution effects is the intertemporal substitution. This just means purchases over time. So there's an intertemporal substitution, your purchases over time. If prices are high today, you might wait for tomorrow. Or if you expect prices to be higher tomorrow, you might change your stuff today. So it's possible for you to substitute purchases from one year to the next, right? So example over time. So example, buy in 2019 instead of 2020. So the consumer can substitute purchases. Businesses do this all the time, by the way, to get around maybe changes in tax code or something. But consumers can do that too, depending on their situation. If we were in a hyperinflation like we saw in Zimbabwe, where next month your money is going to be worth half as much due to the hyperinflation, are you buying stuff today or are you waiting for a month from now? Right now, you're buying it, right? So the inflation is changing your behavior, and so that's what one of the justifications here of substituting across time with the price level. The other one is for foreign purchases. Foreign purchases. So if there's an increase in our price level and no change in the price level of the foreign country, PL star, same notation we were just using earlier this week, right? So the star is the foreign country. Our stuff's more expensive relative to foreigners. What do we want to buy? Foreigner stuff or our stuff? The foreigner stuff, right? So that would cause an increase in imports. Which is a decrease in net exports. Okay, let's move on to aggregate demand shifters. So that's just kind of a little bit of what's going on and why the orange curve looks the way it does. So if you want to highlight, the reason we went through these two effects again was why is the sucker downward sloping? Why does it look the way it does? Due to those two things. So you might see some homework problems or test problems related to why is the aggregate demand curve downward sloping? Those are the answers. Okay, so aggregate demand shifters. What are the things that are going to shift the aggregate demand curve? All right, well, I think it's helpful to think about aggregate demand as its components of the cigarettes. What does cigarettes stand for again? What's the C? Consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports, right? So you can kind of think of aggregate demand as equal to consumption plus investment plus government spending plus net exports. If you kind of think about aggregate demand and its components, it kind of helps you think what might happen to this relationship over here. So we're going to start off with fiscal, yeah, well, let's do it. Okay, I'm going to write up here. Hopefully you guys are okay. You might have to scooch over if you're having trouble anyway. So I'll try to keep mostly here. So number one, shifter number one, expectations. Expectations are an important shifter. If we expect future income, one of the things that we had during the Trump administration is business expectations, profit expectations. Are they higher or lower? They've been rising, right? Because we've seen real changes in different things. And so if we're expecting more economic growth, it's kind of what this is the big Y, this is real GDP. If we're expecting the future to be rosier, higher economic growth, then that would lead to an increase or decrease in aggregate demand. Increase, right? Businesses are now investing in machines and doing more consumers are out there, maybe spending money, maybe spending future money, which isn't always good, but they're spending more money today. Oh, my incomes are going to be good in the future. More realistically, in today's economy, I have a job now and I didn't have one later, right? Unemployment rates are at record lows. More people entering the labor force. They're like, oh, I got a job. I can go, spend some more money, and maybe even just borrow a little bit because I have a job now. I go buy or borrow for a car, even though I wouldn't recommend you doing that or whatever. So we have an increase in expectations that way. Or an increase in the expected price level. So if I think the economy's doing good, and therefore I have some expectations about the price level going up, so a little bit of inflation, right? So I'm changing my forecast. An increase in the price level is the same thing as really saying an increase in expected inflation, because as we did on our test on Wednesday, the inflation rate is new price level minus old price level divided by old price level. Hopefully you guys did pretty well on that. So those inflation expectations can play a role in aggregate demand, or expected profit by businesses. So I'm kind of putting these ors in here. Because these things lead to an increase in aggregate demand. A shift to the right. Yeah?
Why would an increase in expected inflation have an increase in demand?
Because prices are going to be higher in the future, so let's do it today. That's that part. So an increase in aggregate demand, expectations are going to play a role. We'll talk more about expectations once we get the model kind of put together. All right, good. Number 2, fiscal policy. Fiscal policy. Who's doing fiscal policy again? What members of our, at least in the United States? Is that Trumpster or is that Jerome Powell? Who was Powell again? Head of the Fed, the central bank. So does he do monetary policy or fiscal policy? He does monetary policy. So who's heading up fiscal? What is fiscal policy again? What are we changing around, monkeying around with the economy? What kinds of things would be fiscal policy? So we're not doing money supply like we did on the test.
Foreign exchange.
Foreign exchange, maybe some policies that way. Trade barriers, good. Tax rates and government spending. Those are the biggies. Government spending and tax rates. Are we going to increase education spending or decrease it? Are we going to buy more weapons of mass destruction? So for fiscal policy, an increase in G, government spending. C plus I plus G, the G in cigarettes, government spending. An increase in government spending leads to an increase in aggregate demand, a shift to the right. What would cause aggregate demand to shift to the right? An increase in taxes or a decrease in taxes? What would cause it to go this way? Decrease in taxes is an expansionary fiscal policy. So a decrease in little t, the tax rate, a decrease in taxes leads to an increase in aggregate demand. And then finally, an increase in transfer payments. Welfare programs or something else like that. An increase in transfer payments. By the way, when we're doing these changes, we're holding all of the things constant. So we're not changing taxes and spending. I'm just changing spending. So an increase in transfer payments would lead to an increase in aggregate demand. All by itself, holding all of the things constant. All right, so that's our fiscal policy. Number 3, monetary policy. Now we're talking Jerome Powell here, the Federal Reserve. An increase in the money supply, would that tend to expand the economy? It's an expansionary, well, first of all, is that an expansionary monetary policy or a contractionary monetary policy if we're expanding the money supply? Expansionary, yeah, I wasn't trying to trick yourself. If we're increasing the money supply, what do you think? Is that going to lead to an increase or decrease? What changed in our graph when there was an increase on your, I think this was on your test, an increase in the money supply, increased interest rates or decreased interest rates? Decreased interest rates. When interest rates are lower, does that stimulate the economy? Yes, people are going to be borrowing. So an increase in money supply leads to a decrease in interest rates, which is an increase in aggregate demand. It's the Federal Reserve is trying to stimulate the economy. That's part of why we call it an expansionary monetary policy. We didn't say it before, we were just expanding the money supply, but ultimately we're trying to get some economic activity going potentially. Number 4, the foreign exchange, so the exchange rate. E. So a decrease in the exchange rate, depreciation of our currency. So we can buy more foreign currency or less? Less. So that tends to shift our purchases more domestically, right? So a decrease in the exchange rates, also an increase, I don't want to do that. A decrease in the exchange rate leads to an increase in aggregate demand. If the exchange rates fall, then we buy less, but the foreigners, all of a sudden it's cheap to buy American products, right? So then we increase exports. All right, so that kind of sets the stage then. We've got the aggregate demand, aggregate supply, long-run aggregate supply. When they're all in harmony, all three lines cross. So a long-run equilibrium. Long-run equilibrium, I'll just give you the easy way first. All three curves intersect. So the way I have it drawn, point A is currently a long-run equilibrium. All right, so now let's play a little game here. All three curves intersect. What happens if the government spends more money? What happens to the aggregate demand curve? The government spends more money, they don't change the tax rates, there's no balanced budget thing, it's going to shift to the right. And so government spends more money, and let's go ahead and put it at point B now. You guys still have your B up there. So aggregate demand shifts to the right. Now I'm going to add a little more notation on this for you. So let's say G, let's call it G1 equals $100 worth of weapons of mass destruction, or maybe 100 million would be better, or maybe even 100 billion, whatever. $100 billion is what our old government spending was, but Trump wants to build a wall. Did you guys hear that he's getting his other section in Texas? That was on the news this morning. So there's people with golf courses and stuff that cross over the border, and so there's some issues that they have to build the wall. But so Trump's going to build a wall. Let's increase government spending. That's going to mean G2 is, I don't know, I'm just making up some numbers here, 130 billion, right? So the demand curve shifted to the right because of the spending. Did real GDP experience an up or a down? What happened in the economy? Did we expand or contract? We expanded. Now, nothing new was created here at this point. We could have some debates on whether the law of the change was good or not. So let's call this, I guess if we're going to call this 82, so let's call this Y2. The economy moves from A to B, and we have this expansion. So if you're kind of thinking back to the ups and downs of the economy, there's the potential. We're starting to be up here, right? The long run potential is actually below, but we're swinging up in the short run. Where are we going in the long run? So we have a new short run equilibrium. I guess let's add that first here. Short run equilibrium. A short run equilibrium is always where SAS and AD intersect, not the long run curve. So it's not all three, just the short run aggregate supply curve and aggregate demand. So the economy moves in the short run to B. Where's it going in the long run?
Where it is now or in
So holding all other things constant, if the government keeps their spending at this level, where is the long run going to come to a rest? At a higher, by the way, prices climbed. Let me just note that here. So in the short run, GDP went up, but I didn't say PL2, PL1. Prices climbed 7%. What kind of prices though? Output or input or both? output prices, because input prices were held constant at $10. So eventually workers start saying, you know what, my paycheck doesn't buy as much as it used to. It seems like everything on the shelves at Walmart is 7% higher, but I'm still only making $15 an hour. What might they go ask their boss for? A raise. So in the long run, resource prices are going to adjust. So where are we heading in the long run? What intersection up here? The price level, long run, aggregate demand, right? So where the economy is going to come to a rest is where the aggregate demand curve intersects the long run. How is it going to get there? Resource prices are going to catch up. And so in the long run, we'd expect us to go to here. So draw this on your paper. Let's make this, I'm just making up this 110 is kind of meaningless, but let's just call this 109. That is where we expect the economy to go in the long run. So there's been 7% inflation. The employees are like, hey, I'm not even catching up here. If the economy actually ends up going there with output prices, overall, I need a 9% pay raise to stay even, right? And so that's what's going to happen. The short run aggregate supply curve is going to shift to a new level where the nominal wages are 9% higher than where we started. Otherwise, $10, and who's got their thinking cap on? $10 and how many cents? 90 cents. So resource prices are going to climb to $10.90, and the economy comes back to point C. So the thought here is that over some period of time, the economy might heat up, but it eventually needs to come back. If we don't have any more resources, we don't have any more human capital, right? We don't have any more technology. This is where we're going to be in the long run after the dust settles from President Trump building the wall and jacking up some government spending. It'll ultimately be inflationary, especially, that's kind of a good example, a little bit of a question, is the wall going to do anything for us? Is spending that money a good investment or not? I don't really want to get into that debate, because guess what? Class is over. Mark your calendars. Class is done. You are dismissed.